Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari.
Hare Krishna, dear devotees, welcome back to Books Are the Basis. This is an initiative by the ISKCON Ministry of Education, trying to help devotees and encourage devotees to read more often Srila Prabhupada's books. And in this series today, in this interview, our special guest is His Grace Yogesvara Prabhu. Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much for joining us. Great honor.
My pleasure.
Nice to meet you in this way.
Yes.
Yogesvara Prabhu is a Prabhupada disciple, born in New York, and later as a young man studied in Paris, university there, and came in touch with Srila Prabhupada, devotees there, and in 1970, January 70, got initiated by Srila Prabhupada as Yogeshwar Das, and then traveled with Srila Prabhupada also as translator in French-speaking countries, served in Paris also as a temple president, also served as director at the BBT for French-speaking publications. So for many years served directly in the movement. And then later on in 82, returned back to New York, started a career in film, producing children's programs for the Disney Channel and the public broadcasting service. Later became the director for programming in Cablevision, the national's sixth largest cable television provider. And so actually quite an interesting life story you have, because you made a career in different ways in film, as we mentioned, but then also you served as a vice president in New York's largest PR firm, where you advised communities on their role in peacekeeping initiatives. That's also the United Nations Peace Summit of Religions. You served there. And also, Yogeshwar Prabhu is known as an author, has written several books, also on the Holocaust history. He's also a popular speaker on that same topic. Has also published other books, such as The Spiritual and Musical Journey of George Harrison, Gita Wisdom, and of course of children books on Krishna conscious. And in 2016 has published a biography of Srila Prabhupada for the 50 years anniversary of ISKCON. The book is Swami in a Strange Land, How Krishna Came to West. Wonderful book on Prabhupada's life. So yeah, it's so great to have you with us.
Thank you.
So we are excited to hear your point of view and your realizations on the importance of Prabhupada's books. Maybe we can start. We already mentioned you met the devotees in the 70s in Paris. Would you like to share how you came in touch with Krishna consciousness, and especially with Prabhupada's books, and how these books changed your life?
Growing up in the 60s, an interest in non-military solutions to world problems was an interest of my generation.
Mm-hmm.
And India represented, at the time, before we knew anything about Prabhupada, it was Gandhi and nonviolent, non-cooperation, and so on. In fact, Dr. Martin Luther King actually traveled to India and met Gandhi. I believe that was in the late 50s. And there's some indication that Gandhi had an influence on Dr. King's nonviolent freedom marches in the South of the United States. In any case, I was studying literature at the Sorbonne, and there's a handful of devotees in Paris. We're talking now fall of 1969. You were still in your last lifetime.
Right.
My Vardhma Pradarshaka Guru, Umapati, glommed onto me and said, you seem interested in mystical things. I had an interest in mysticism. I was reading books on mysticism. And where Umapati was staying at the time with another devotee named Hanuman, they had copies of Prabhupada's original Bhagavatams from India. So they were busy cooking some prasadam. They weren't supposed to cook in this little hotel room, but they had a Bunsen burner stove that they kept under their bed. They would cook rice. So while they were cooking, I happened to see a copy of Srimad Bhagavatam Part 1, that old edition that Prabhupada printed by the League of Devotees in India. And it had this very unusual smell to this combination of incense and forest aromas, and there's something very magical. And the cover wasn't very well bound. The canvas burlap cover kept sliding up and down, and the whole thing, it felt like it was going to dissolve if you didn't handle it carefully. And I skimmed through it and saw unusual phrases like, "Oh, the sage," and "sitting down tightly on bank of Ganges," But despite the linguistic peculiarities, it was obviously a work of love. There was so much in it, with Sanskrit, the synonyms, transliterations, and so on. And so I was very keen on reading that. At one point, Umapati said, if you're this interested in Prabhupada's books, you should go to London. This was December of 1969. He said, Prabhupada is there. And he said, it's very rare to meet a pure devotee of God. So that was intriguing, but I hesitated because Umapati had a shaved head. And I thought to myself, if I get too interested in whatever this guy is doing, I might end up looking like him. I wasn't into that. But then he said, Prabhupada is staying at John Lennon's estate, and he's been recording with George Harrison. I was on the next boat train to London. That was it. That's all he had to say. Beatles, I'm there. So I got to London, and I missed Prabhupada by one day. He had left the day before. So let that be a lesson to you. If you have an opportunity to spend time with the devotees, don't hesitate. Grab the opportunity. It's a very rare thing, privilege. Anyway, I was very taken by the atmosphere of the London temple. This was Bury Place. And they were giving classes. So my contact with Prabhupada's books first was with this Bhagavatam from India. Then back in those days, there really weren't any books. There was what was there? There was the purple Bhagavad-Gita from Macmillan. I think Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, and that was about it. I remember the day that Krishna book arrived in London from the printer in Japan. It was like receiving this brick of solid silver that had come in the mail. This huge, immense, beautiful thing. And there was George Harrison's preface at the beginning, and that was it. I was smitten, just mesmerized by these amazing stories. And I remember that Yamuna Devi, who was kind of my mentor in those days, and she took me under her wing. In her room, she had a manuscript for Krishna book. This was prior to its arrival. And I snuck into her room one day because I was so interested in Prabhupada's writings, and grabbed the manuscript and just quickly opened it. And the first page I opened to, it said, baby Krishna climbed onto the breast of the Putana monster witch and sucked out her life. I very carefully put the manuscript back on the shelf and backed slowly out of the room. And I remember thinking, I am in way over my head here. I don't know what I've gotten myself into. So there was this kind of a dimension of surrealism to Prabhupada's books. So for me, it wasn't just contacting, the pragmatic appeal of the philosophy, the idea of samsara and karma and so on, and bhakti and all that. It was more a mystical appeal of these incredible descriptions of things. And I just needed to know, what is that all about? What's going on here? So that kind of started a love affair with Prabhupada's writings, to the point where, I would spend every minute that I could reading his books or manuscripts, whatever was available. Once in Geneva, Prabhupada walked by the room where I was staying at, serving as his secretary, and he saw me reading from one of his books. The next morning in Bhagavatam class, he said, "They're just like our Yogesvara Prabhu." Can you imagine? Call me Yogesvara Prabhu. He is always reading our books. So this is to be encouraged. So I figure I was on the right track. That's kind of how it got started.
Yeah, beautiful. So you got that personal confirmation from Prabhupada that what we are talking today, the importance of reading Prabhupada's books. And naturally you had that taste, you had that attraction to Prabhupada's books from the very beginning. It's beautiful. Yeah.
It began with an attraction, or a taste, as you call it, for literature.
Yeah.
The importance of the written word in human history can't be underestimated. Shouldn't be underestimated. Shouldn't be. There's a power to language that can evoke deep emotion, can change the direction of someone's life. Profound ideas expressed beautifully. Now, this is important. You can have the most profound truths in the universe, but if they're awkwardly expressed, or they're boring or dull or unimaginative, no one's going to particularly care. Prabhupada had a literary facility for making even abstract, complex ideas beautiful and appealing. So I was drawn to that.
So later on, also in your service, because you served at the BBT then, so that natural, inclination for literature also manifested in your service. Like this term, books are the basis. How would you describe, what does it mean for you, books are the basis, also in regards to your service that you had at the BBT? Would you like to share something about that?
Yeah, I've thought about that ever since you extended an invitation to come on your podcast here. And to be frank with you, I felt some reluctance.
Mm-hmm.
Some of my ideas are a bit unorthodox, shall we say. Personally, I believe that for the most part, well, look, people, each of us is an individual, and each of us has our particular relationship with Krishna, with Prabhupada, with our spiritual master, whoever he or she may be, and with the books, with the teachings. And I think it's disappointing or sad when someone insists that this is the way to understand the teachings. This is the proper interpretation of the teachings. I think that's shallow. I think that's short-sighted. Literature is a mirror of culture. It's a mirror of the soul. It's a mirror of our own psychic background. And each of us responds to teachings and ideas in our own very unique way. So the phrase "books are the basis." I would challenge people to go beyond the obvious sense of that. Books are the basis. Or what's the obvious sense? The obvious sense is distributing books has been something that's always been emphasized in ISKCON. Right? That's an obvious interpretation of books are the basis. Prabhupada's teachings are the law books for the next 10,000 years. That's an obvious interpretation of books are the basis. What's a more nuanced understanding of books are the basis? A more nuanced understanding would be to say that the way you read these books, how willing are you to challenge your understanding of what you're reading? I think sometimes the reading can be done mechanically, and I object to that. I don't think it's, here's how you get through the Srimad Bhagavatam in 2 years, right? You read this many verses, these many days, these many purports, multiply it, do the math, and get through the Bhagavatam. All right, but what have you understood of the Bhagavatam? What have you taken away? Has it inspired you? What is the depth of your reading? So, sometimes one page in Prabhupada's books can be worth weeks of discussion. So I think when we say books are the basis, I would say the teachings are the foundation of our spiritual progress. And we have a responsibility, I truly believe this, to challenge what we think we know. So that our relationship with Prabhupada's books, our relationship with him, our relationship with Krishna consciousness, doesn't become something mechanical. That's the worst that you can do. The worst that you can do is turn your Krishna conscious life into something mechanical. Read this, do that, chant this, eat that. That's it's good. It's better than nothing.
Of course.
But I know. Let me give you an example. I'm going to go out on a limb here with you. Okay, so just bear with me. My impression, speaking with many devotees, is that there's a certain percentage of people participating in Krishna conscious life who actually don't believe what they're reading, or they don't understand it well enough to say, this is truth. Did Krishna and Balaram really jump off this mountain that's 100 miles high? And did this miracle happen? And did Chaitanya Mahaprabhu actually reveal himself with 10 arms to the Brahmin who came to stay overnight in the home of his parents? And all that miraculous stuff. Well, you can say that's my faith. My faith is that these things are real. But if that's the case, if the only way to understand these extraordinary things that we read in Prabhupada's books is to say, well, I accept it on faith, then our movement is going to have a very small impact on the world. There's only a tiny percentage of people who are going to be willing to follow that path. Yes, I embrace this on faith. There's no audio recording. There was no video camera when Krishna spoke to Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. We don't have any digital library showing the acharyas in their day, or visual imagery of the incarnations on beta tape, for example. It's faith. We have faith. These people, Prabhupada and the acharyas, that they're not lying to us. They're thinking about our well-being. They wish us to emerge from the cycle of birth and death, and so what they're giving us with a whole heart. And then I have faith in them, and therefore I have faith in teaching. That's not many people are going to follow that path. I mean, I don't want to put a cap on it. I can't say only 2% of the world's ever going to do that. You know, miraculous things can happen. But if you look, for example, at a book like Krishna Samhita by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he had a different idea which appeals very much to me and many of my colleagues. And that was that there are different levels of approaching the teachings in these books. One level, if someone is of little faith, would be metaphorical. For example, Bhaktivinoda Thakur gives the example of Aghasura, the Aghasura demon, that Aga, or evil, in the form of this Asura, evil personified, put himself on the road, an obstruction, and Krishna came and, defeated evil. So good conquers evil. So there's a metaphorical understanding of the teachings. Then he gives a little bit higher or different interpretation, which is a kind of fundamentalist. The only way to understand this is literally. This is exactly what happened. There was a monster. It was 10 miles long. He opened his mouth. It was like a cave. And the cowherd boys went in. And then Krishna went in, expanded himself, and choked the snake and freed his friend. That's what it was. That's a literal interpretation. Or this Muni gave 10,000 cows, 10 million cows in charity. It's literal. This is how it happened. That's what was done. Right? 10 million cows. Okay, well, that's, a kind of, if you will, a literalist understanding of the books. Then Bhaktivinoda Thakur points to a third kind of approach to the literature, which he kind of points to. That's the one that we should be looking at. It's the position of the Saragrahis, if you will. It's the position of I would say the introspective, enlightened devotee who has his understanding, his relationship with the teachings of Krishna, and doesn't put anybody else down. He's able to appreciate this person has a metaphorical interpretation, that person has a fundamentalist interpretation. It's all good. That our role in the world here is to encourage people in their Krishna consciousness and their spiritual life. That means embracing them and accepting them where they are. Not someday when they awaken and see the world the way we see it and believe the way we do and behave the way we do and think the way we... No. Vaishnava reaches out to people where they are and appreciates them, offers them encouragement. So I would hope that people, everyone participating in Prabhupada's mission, would just take a step back to begin asking themselves some of the tough questions. How much do I actually believe this? Is it mythology? Is it just a nice device, for putting good teachings out? So, for example, I'm sorry, I'm kind of monopolizing our time here. I hope you'll forgive me for it. But I thought a little bit about it when you invited me. If you look at the Bhagavad-Gita, for example, 11th chapter, here's Arjuna witnessing the Virata Rupa, this awesome, terrifying form of Krishna. I mean, horrible. People being crushed by the teeth of these multi-headed divinity, its darkness and death and the defeat of every human endeavor. It's every reason to become an atheist, seeing this horrible form of, the defeat of our every endeavor. And then something happens so startling at the beginning of the 12th chapter that many scholars think this had to have been added later. It makes no sense. That's how crazy what happens in the beginning of the 12th chapter. What is it? Well, all of a sudden, coming out of this horrible traumatizing experience, all of a sudden, whoop, Arjuna becomes philosophical. Well, my dear Krishna, what do you think? Which was better? Should one worship the impersonal Brahman, or should one embark on the path of bhakti? Tell me what you think. It's like, what? How do you come out of this emotionally wrenching experience and all of a sudden he's detached and he's talking like this? Okay, so what's going on here? Either the Bhagavad-Gita is not really history. It's a literary device for putting ideas, good ideas of behavior and yoga and so on out into the world. In which case, you don't really have to think about what the literary content is. You don't have to look for a rational explanation for the behavior of the people involved. It's a device for putting the teachings out. Or, on the other hand, if you accept that these are real people, then something else is going on here. As best I've been able to understand what happens there at the beginning of the 12th chapter of the Gita, Arjuna is saying to Krishna, I don't like you in the form you've just shown me. I find it terrible. And how am I supposed to now relate to you, seeing what you do in the world, seeing the kind of things that happen in this world? And I believe what's going on here, if you read it in a certain way, Krishna's response to Arjuna is, I understand. I understand. And if you can't accept things that I sometimes have to do in this world because you find them too painful, to what you judge to be too unjust, why this suffering to this degree and so on, I understand that you don't get it. Then don't take to the path of bhakti. Don't do bhakti. Don't try to force it. Do karma yoga. Do jnana yoga. Do some charity work. Do something good in the world, because I will accept you for whatever you can do. You may reject me. I'm never going to reject you. I love you. Okay, now all of a sudden we have two friends. Remember, these are lifelong friends. Krishna and Arjuna grew up together. Arjuna is married to Krishna's sister. So this is going on. And it's a love affair between these two people, trying together to find a reconciliation for the way things are in the universe. That, for me, brings a dimension of reality to the reading of Prabhupada's Bhagavad-Gita that may not be obvious. I think that's our responsibility, is to go deep inside the books, to eke out their deeper meaning so that it touches our heart. And it's not something mechanical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very powerful point that according to our consciousness, according to where we stand in life, we may be able to access the book in a certain way, but we should strive for the deeper meaning behind and not judge other people where they stand, but just, yeah. Okay, well, that's a good intro into the topic of books are the basis, with a different way to look at it to help us to. I like the question also you said, that we should ask ourselves, how much do I actually believe, and how much do I need to develop a deeper understanding in order to continue? And I would like to get back to this point at a later point when we talk about Prabhupada's books also, but maybe we could just return to the beginning with the general question of why it's important to read Prabhupada's books. Just in general, why would we encourage devotees to read regularly? Why is that important? Is that okay with you, or?
Is it okay? Sure, of course it's okay with me. Perhaps we could ask the question in a slightly different way.
Mm-hmm.
Not why is it important, but how are you reading the books?
Mhm.
I think advancing in Krishna consciousness is difficult if you try to do it on your own. Find a friend, or even better, a group of friends. Start a book club, start a study group, so that these issues can be brought to the surface. When you read on your own, you only have your own mind for company. That's not very good. If you're with others, you can share your realizations, you can share your insights, and you can share your doubts also.
Mm.
I don't get this. Was it King Nriga in the Krishna book who was cursed to be like a lizard in a well because he had asked for his cows back from a Brahmin next door neighbor, something. And you would think, reading that story, that Krishna rescues him, and the message would be, don't be a selfish Brahmin like that Brahmin over there who cursed you because his cow wandered into your yard or whatever. But no, the lesson is, don't offend a Brahmin. Even if he's wrong, don't offend a Brahmin. Then I go, what? How is that the takeaway? It's like, that's one children's book I'll never write. The story of Ring. I don't get it. So there are things, we can discuss these things, and they're worth discussing. So I would say it's not so much a matter of why is it important to read Prabhupada's books. Well, I think it's self-evident. But how you read them, or with whom, on what level are you reading?
Yeah, in order to develop a deeper understanding, it's kind of required to have that kind of sangha and possibility to ask question and go deeper in understanding. Yeah,
critically important.
Yeah. All right. I liked in your prologue of the book, you speak about your visit in Bhubaneswar. Actually, that was the time I was just born on the 3rd of February, just when Prabhupada was on the way back to Mayapur, most probably. So at that time, you visited Prabhupada in Bhubaneswar, and you share a statement there when Prabhupada said that when they see these books, they will understand that Krishna consciousness is here to stay. And you emphasize the point that the message of Prabhupada is basically that, yeah, I will leave at some point, but these books, they will stay, and the importance of the books who, will carry the message further. At the same time, we know that Prabhupada lives forever in his books in a way that he's present in his books. Would you like to share some realization you have how you experience Prabhupada's presence when you read Prabhupada's books, or maybe what attitude is required to experience Prabhupada in his books? How can we access Prabhupada through his books?
Okay, I'll speak to that, but let me preface it by saying that, first of all, it's important to recognize that what we were talking about together was children's books. Prabhupada never wrote any children's books.
Mm-hmm.
I had come to see him in Bhubaneswar to get his blessings for doing books about Krishna for children. And I wanted to know, is this okay?
Mm-hmm.
10th canto is not for children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's for Paramahamsas. It's for, by the time you get to 10th canto, you're supposed to be a self-realized soul, which is what allows you to understand 10th canto. So I want to understand, is this okay? And he said, yes, what's learned early in life is never forgotten. He said, so do books for children. He said, make them beautiful. He said, get good artists. He was very specific about how to do it. And his point was that specifically when the Indian community sees that we're writing books for their children, they'll understand, oh, this movement is real. It's here to stay. They're thinking about the future generations, and they'll support us. They'll become more comfortable with our society. So he was, that particular conversation was about children's books. But I think there's another memory that I have that's relevant to this conversation. The first time I met him, which was in Paris after he came from Moscow visiting Professor Kotovsky, 71, I believe. We had a small house in the suburbs, a place called Fontenay-aux-Roses. And somehow I managed to get back there with him and his servant. We had before all of the other devotees from the airport. And so I had some time with him. And he said a number of things to me then. And at one point in our discussion, I said, you know, in your books, Srila Prabhupada, you glorify the gopis as being the highest devotees. You know, that their love for Krishna is the highest love. Is that what you want us to do? Do you want us to aspire to love Krishna like the gopis? And he raised his up. He said, that's very nice if you can do that. But you have to be completely free from all material desire. He said, for now, you should read books. And he specifically said, Chaitanya Charitamrita and Chaitanya Bhagavat. He had not translated. He never translated Chaitanya Bhagavat. So here he was recommending that we read a book that he had not written. So sometimes people say, don't read anything except Prabhupada's books. Well, I think that's a nice sentiment, but it's a little short-sighted. Don't get contaminated by reading books by other authors, but it doesn't mean you can't read other books. In fact, the proof that you've read Prabhupada's books effectively is that you'll be able to read other books and recognize when something's off.
Yeah.
So, what he did in 12 years is beyond astonishing. It's beyond miraculous. To this day, I don't know how he did as much as he did. The fact that he wasn't able to do so much else, we should at least be a little understanding of that. Had there been more time, he would have translated and commented many, many different books. Jayadwara Swami and others have a whole long list of books that he said he wanted to do. So, but I don't think he wanted us to stop. Books are the basis. Read Prabhupada's book. Yes, of course, of course. I don't think he meant narrowly, ultra conservatively, these books only. I don't think that was ever his intention.
Mm. Yeah, as you mentioned, once we read Prabhupada's books throughout, like we have a deep understanding, then that gives us basically a good way to look at other books, and we understand what is in line with Siddhanta and what not. And it's a basis, but of course there is other books. Prabhupada also referred to Brihad Bhagavatamrita, for example, that every devotee should read that book. And there is other statements where Prabhupada encouraged reading. Yeah, Goswamis.
I asked him one time about a book by a paleontologist named Desmond Morris called The Naked Ape that came out in the late 60s. And in this book, Desmond Morris theorizes that humans are really nothing more than sophisticated animals, naked apes, if you will. Our behavior is nothing more than a more complex version of the behavior of animals. We shake hands. What is that? Well, that's like monkeys showing I'm not carrying any weapons. We shave our underarms, and then put on deodorant, in order to emit a scent that is meant to attract partner. Well, anyway, the book was essentially saying we're animals. So I mentioned it to Prabhupada in Paris, fully expecting him to say, well, that's all pure speculation. Humans are meant for Krishna consciousness and so on. And he surprised me. He said, yes, he's right. He's absolutely correct. He said, without Krishna consciousness, we're nothing but animals. you should use this book in your preaching.
Mm.
He was very clear about it. Yeah. So Prabhupada was someone for everything. We might have been fanatical and narrow-minded, but he wasn't fanatical.
That reminds me of another point, how Prabhupada always saw the world through the eyes of Shastra. Like, hearing something, he immediately thinks about Bhagavatam, who also speaks about two-legged animals if we are not Krishna conscious. So that's, of course, one of the goals also of reading Prabhupada's books, that we develop such a vision, the vision of Shastra Chakshu. Like to share any thoughts on that? What does it mean to develop such a Shastra Chakshu? How will it change our life if we have such a vision?
I think we're still figuring that one out, to be very candid with you. I don't think we've actually understood what that means. I don't think I'm alone in this, but I haven't heard too many people say it out loud. Maybe they're afraid of what the reaction was. But I'm 72 years old now. What are they going to do? Take away my neck beads? I mean, whatever. Seeing through the eyes of Shastra, to my way of thinking, means discovering the language, a new language with which to present Krishna consciousness in various areas of human endeavor. Each field of activity has its own particular vocabulary. The world of science, I'm privileged to sit on the board of directors of the Bhaktivedanta Institute. That world has its own vocabulary, its own concepts, its own terms, its own challenges, its own to-do list of things. The world of medicine, very different vocabulary, has a very different list of challenges. Environmental studies, government administration, the peacekeeping process, international law, agriculture, every field of endeavor, every field has its own particular terminology and sets of objectives. And it's naive and embarrassing to think that we just go in and say, well, chant Hare Krishna and everything will be fine. You say that and thinking people go, all right, thanks for the food, be well, God bless. They don't take us seriously. To be taken seriously, we have to have a significant contribution to make to a particular area of endeavor. And that means being schooled in that field. We need specialists. If I've learned anything after more than a half century in Krishna consciousness, it is to not generalize about devotional service. You have to particularize. Bringing Krishna consciousness into a particular arena of activity means to particularize. What are the issues of that area of activity? What are the terms of discussion? What are the issues? What are the things that are being talked about? What are the different points of view? What are the goals and objectives there? And once we've mastered the challenges of a particular area, we can begin to think about how can the Chaitanya Vaishnav perspective make a contribution here. It's not the other way around. It's not, we have the answer, they just need to get to where we are. That I can't think of anything more counterproductive and naive and dangerous as that.
So basically you're saying we need to really understand and then also develop a language and present Krishna consciousness in such a way that these people can relate to it and that we can actually offer something specific, a specific solution to their challenge in their particular language.
Well, I'd even go further than that. I would say that if you are not schooled in a particular area, don't pretend that you know anything about it.
Yeah.
Stay away. There was only, to my knowledge, to my experience, it was only Prabhupada, who could go into any situation and know just what to say.
Yeah.
I've never seen anyone, no one else had that ability. He could sit with someone from the World Health Organization. He could sit with a Sanskritist from the Sorbonne of Paris. He could sit down with the mayor. He could sit down with anyone And he would know how to engage people in conversations that touched them and their lives and their field of activity. I've not seen that. I've not seen anyone else who could do that. And you need to specialize. You need to know, what is your particular field? You know, are you embarked on a particular academic course, or are you working in healthcare, or whatever your particular field is? Master that field, become an expert in that field, and then you can begin to think about how do we bring some element of the theology, the culture, to bear on what's going on. But don't be so presumptuous as to think that you already know. That's dangerous.
Yeah. I believe, you wrote this biography about Srila Prabhupada, as far as I understood from the preface also, specifically for a general audience, like general readers, that just people in general have a nice entry or get a chance to meet Prabhupada through his life story, right? Because we have different biographies already written, but this was an attempt also to write a version of Prabhupada's life, so people in general can relate to it properly. Is that right?
Yes, that's true. And my job toward that end was to step out of my own role as his disciple, to step back away from my own participation in his movement, and to write as a responsible author. Someone who takes their craft, the craft of writing, seriously, recognizes that they have first and foremost an obligation to their readers to provide them something that justifies their spending however many hours of their life with your book. That means that what you write has to be a satisfying reading experience. It has to offer something of value. It has to be done in a language that they understand. I don't know how many books I've read by devotees that I don't understand. I mean, I appreciate what they're trying to do, but I don't see how anyone's going to understand them. I mean, there's this presumption that people know what you're talking about, what you've written about with this terminology and that terminology. It's like they're reading for the people in their temple community, and they don't really care about any of that. Our job here is to think more broadly than that, and I believe compassion means putting yourself in the other person's position. So that's true of writing as well. You have to put yourself in the other person's position. Am I writing something that they, outside my world, will understand, find something valuable, useful here? Is it interesting? Writing is a difficult thing. Anyone who says that writing is easy either has never written or he's a liar. It's existentially threatening to write a biography of Srila Prabhupada. And now, I'm really diving off the deep end. I'm trying to write a biography of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu.
Well,
it's driving me crazy. At least Prabhupada, he came from within our sphere of experience. Chaitanya.
Wow.
Anyway, so kindly pray for me. Give me your blessings.
We're looking forward to that book. That's amazing. That's wonderful to hear.
We'll see.
We also wanted to touch a little bit on because since it's obvious that you have a lot of experience in presenting Krishna consciousness to a broader audience, and you're very sensitive in how to do that. Now, when we read Srila Prabhupada's books, we come also across quite challenging statements, which maybe people turn off and they will have difficulty to understand. What would be your advice to ISKCON, to the devotees, how to deal with that? Do you have some thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, all right. Well, you ask a lot on a first date, don't you? I'll give you an answer. I don't win friends when I talk about this stuff. I think the wholehearted faithful, loving follower of Srila Prabhupada will have the courage to stand up and speak as though Srila Prabhupada was here and say, my dear Srila Prabhupada, with all the love and respect that I have for you, what you have written here is wrong. It must be changed, because people will not understand what you mean to say. They will hold it against you. They will hold it against your movement. And we are losing people because of what you have said here in your books. People are going away, which is obviously not your intention. So as a faithful, loving disciple, I beg you to please consider this statement has to go. Now, obviously, maybe because I have the privilege of knowing him and spending time with him, I can say something like that, and it's kind of an executive privilege of some kind. But from my experience with him, Prabhupada was never someone to take offense. If something was being offered with love and sincerely, even if it seemed critical, he considered it. He didn't bridle. I mean, what are you saying? How dare you speak to me like? He didn't have that kind of an attitude. I remember one time there was something in his Bhagavad-Gita. I asked him, is this right? Is this what you meant to say? He said, well, read it to me. I said, well, all right, it's this verse. It says about the Kshetra and Kshetragya, the field and the knower of the field. And at the time, the purport said, one who identifies with his body is the knower of the field. I said, Prabhupada, the way this is written, it sounds like anyone who thinks that their body is an enlightened soul. He said, read it again. So I did. He said, no, that's wrong. That should be changed. No biggie, no big deal. It wasn't clear. Change it. Now, we're not going to get into a whole discussion about how many changes and where and who. That's not the issue here. What I'm saying is that Srila Prabhupada was in favor of anything that would further the purposes of his mission, including making some adjustments to something. If in the English, here's the thing. If you wanted to understand Prabhupada, you didn't just need to speak English. You needed to understand how he spoke English. You needed to understand how he was using language, what his intentions were, and then you can make some suggestions about how to adjust something for his purposes. Now, that may be the prerogative only of people who were privileged like I was, or some of the other first-generation devotees to be with him. I think we've entered a period of some kind of intense paranoia that these things, and we can understand this. Look, you open that door, you start making changes. Where will it end? That's always the argument, right? Where will it end? Open that door, and you're going to let in all of the reformists and all of the, women's libbers, and it's like this. But that's not the case. Things can be adjusted, or if nothing else, footnote them, annotate them, give readers something. Why? Otherwise, they're going to think anyone who says this, I don't want to have anything to do with it, and we alienate people. Right? So sometimes it's a matter of not understanding what he was saying. Sometimes it's a matter of him expressing things in a way that he may not have been aware of the impact of that manner of expression on his readership or his audience. That was our responsibility. And if we didn't have the insight or the courage to stand up and just say, Prabhupada, this needs to be changed, that's on our shoulders. That's not on him. That's on us.
It's an interesting point. You're making that Prabhupada actually was quite open for feedbacks, and in the sense of that he just wanted to spread his movement, and if his disciples would give him an advice, listen, in order to spread this would be actually more helpful to express it in such a way, Prabhupada would be open to adjust himself, because he was constantly learning about Western culture and mentality, right? That was one point. And the other point, that some statements are just, they shouldn't be there because it's just, people can't understand. Of course, the question comes what to do. Should they be removed? Or as you mentioned, maybe there should be a footnote. Actually, there was once a survey amongst ISKCON leaders, which that discussion was addressed. Should it be removed? Should we put footnote? And if footnote, should it be right there or at the end? Or should we just write commentaries? Should devotees just write books about Prabhupada's books and write commentaries so people can understand how to properly see Prabhupada's statement? But it's a challenge, certainly a challenge how to deal with that. But your point was that it's our responsibility to do something about it, right? That was your point.
Well, unless you want to become like, like the Satmar ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, or the Amish, some religious group that has zero impact on the rest of the world. We can do that. We can live like that if you want to. It's not my way of serving my spiritual master.
So in that sense, responsibility is there, depending on in which direction ISKCON want to go.
Yeah, you can't avoid a difficult challenge if you really want to make progress in your Krishna consciousness. You can't just go with the flow. You've got to be prepared to embrace the tough stuff. You've got to be prepared to address the hard issues, the hard questions, the tough questions. Otherwise, how do you make progress? Just, floating along. Let's have another kirtan. Is there seconds on Prasadam, Prabhu? I mean, fine. Look, I'm not putting it down. For some people, not everyone is meant to become, head up the way I am, I guess. But I truly believe that if you want to advance in Krishna consciousness, you better start asking some of the tough questions. And maybe, listen, Krishna, maybe for me, it's a function of age. I'm at a point in my life where, it's now or never. I've got Gornitai deities in my home now for the first time. I haven't had home deities ever before. I have them only as of 2 years ago. When I started writing the biography of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, I figured, help me, But it's going to happen sooner or later. And the good news is that prayers are answered. If you demonstrate a willingness to go deeper, resources will come to your aid. Have no fear. My devotee will never perish.
Thank you so much for addressing these topics, which are we don't talk so often about it, and maybe we should talk more about how to deal with these issues, especially also in regards to when we talk about reading Prabhupada's books. Coming slowly to an end. Do we have any specific advice to share to the devotees in regards to improving one's study? We already talked a bit about that it's important to have the proper consciousness, how to study Prabhupada's books. Any thoughts on that? How devotees can overcome obstacles in reading Prabhupada's books?
I would suggest that there are no obstacles
Okay.
in reading Prabhupada's books. The obstacles live within our own heart. The obstacles are more often than not very human issues of someone is unhappy, someone is disappointed, there's something in their life that confuses them, their hearts have been broken, or they're bitter about something, or some tragedy has befallen them. If you're dealing with the sadnesses of life, it's not going to be easy to read Prabhupada's books. You're not going to find self-help suggestions in Prabhupada's books. You'll find wisdom there, but very often it's other things that stand in the way of our receiving that transcendental message more effectively. So be honest with yourself. If there's something that's troubling you, if there's something that's standing in the way of your spiritual progress, don't ignore that. I deal with young people, in the youth sanghas. I'm a mediator for ISKCON Resolve. Our communities are really not that different from the rest of the world. People go through the same kinds of marital challenges or parental challenges or health challenges, or this is a sad world, material world. Terrible things happen here. And if you're overburdened by that, if you're too weighted down, then you're going to want some sweetness. And why do people indulge in sweets? It's not because biologically they need more sugar in their diet. It's because very often their lives are sad and they want more sweetness in their life. Why do people turn to sexual pleasures or some other kind of comfort? Well, it's because they're sad. It's not because they're bad people, not demons. They're sad. They're in need of comfort. Some people may be pathological, in which case avoid them. I'm not, if you're in an abusive relationship, get the heck out of there, Don't say, oh, this is Krishna's mercy. Just get out of it. But if you don't deal with those things, I'm not sure that reading Prabhupada's books is going to be a very rewarding experience. So be honest about yourself.
Yeah, like being a healthy human being and having, dealt with some issues, and only then you will be able to absorb transcendental knowledge properly. That's what you're saying, right? Yeah.
How do we expect people to understand, principles of achintya bheda bheda tattva when they're dealing with divorce or obesity or anorexia or a child who's in difficulties? I mean, it's unreasonable.
And when it comes to applying transcendental knowledge, that's also one of the topics we talk about. How do we make sure to apply transcendental knowledge in our daily life? How is your experience in this regard? How does Krishna consciousness become more realized from jnana to actual realization?
The way you phrase some of your questions, I feel like I'm juggling 5 balls at once here.
You can adjust the questions the way you want to answer them. That's no problem.
Sometimes an effective understanding of the teachings is very counterintuitive. if all that you know is the party line, do this and you'll get that. Well, that's a materialistic understanding of transcendental knowledge. But it doesn't even hold up to scrutiny. If you do this, then that happens. Really? If that's true, how is it that Prabhupada initiated more than 5,000 people? Where are they? If it's that simple, chant Hare Krishna and be happy. If it's that simple, we have millions of people who have gotten books. Where are they? So, I think we just need to be a little bit more realistic about the application of the teachings. Prabhupada was a very practical person. My conversations with him were wonderful because he was so practical. We talked about his children. We talked about what it was like for him, before he came to the West. And he was a very personable person. I would suggest that the first thing, if someone wants to know how to integrate transcendental teachings into their lives, strip away everything you ever thought about the word transcendental. Just put it aside. Replace it with the word human. Think in terms of being a good person. What does it mean to be a good person? Maybe that'll help.
Thank you so much. Do you have any final words? Any message you'd like to share with us at the end?
That's all I got.
It was a lot, and it was a lot of food for thought, I would say. A lot of deep points, realizations, and things to reflect on. So thank you so much, Prabhu, for giving us your valuable time and sharing your realizations on this topic.
Thank you for your hospitality and your insightful questions.
Thank you. All right. Thank you much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai Prabhupada.
Jai.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.